All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Thanks for joining the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. Well, in the days leading up to this discussion with J. Michael Waller, the president was nearly assassinated. A special counsel that was going after the president was essentially deposed in federal court. The sitting president of the United States was deposed. Those same people who deposed the sitting president of the United States installed another person to take his place. And the Secret Service chief resigned. J. Michael Waller is the author of Big Intel: How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. He's also with the Center for Security Policy and is a guy who specializes in disinformation and misinformation. Not that he does it, but rather he studies it. Professor, guy with lots of letters after his name, so he's like the real deal and everything. And here's a look at his book, J. Michael Waller, Big Intel. And he's answering the question we all want to know. What the hell happened? And before we get there, let's find out. I just listed a bunch of things that just happened. What's going on?
We don't know. So we just don't know. I mean, think about it. You have the same agency that's investigating the attempted assassination of President Trump is the same agency that created the fake counterintelligence investigation, operation, not even an investigation, to make it look like he was a Russian spy, to say nothing of all the other falsehoods that the FBI did. So we're supposed to trust the FBI to lead this investigation while the Secret Service chief stonewalls and is forced to resign. I mean, when you get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the conservatives in the House all united on this, you've got a real big bad problem here.
I watched the hearings yesterday, which is yesterday, the day before we are speaking. And I was kind of surprised. Here's the one thing before we delve into why this is happening in our intel agencies. And the thing is that if you get rid, which we since have heard the Secret Service chief has resigned, if you get rid of her, at least at the DOJ and the FBI, she no longer has to comply with and cooperate with any of the internal investigations by the IG. That's all gone because they have nothing to hold over her. If they had not let her walk away with this resignation, they would at least be able to stick her in the steno pool, to use an antiquated phrase, and to be able to keep control over her so that she would be obligated at that point to comply with and cooperate with the Inspector General's reports, looking into this cataclysmic failure of the Secret Service. But now we have no control.
Well, we kind of do, because she has a successor and she has the people who are underneath her who all have careers to protect. And so they know a lot of what she knows, if not everything she knows and more. So getting them up there to testify while their careers are still on the line will be very important. And then, of course, you have the civil side of it, too. Think of the man who was murdered and the other two men who were wounded. They can sue civil cases. So there's still a lot of ways to squeeze information out of this terrible former Secret Service director.
I mean, that's true. You would get some discovery out of those things. But I mean, she does have, in her capacity as Secret Service official, limited liability, right? She has immunity, essentially, doesn't she?
I don't know the law, but there's a lot of ways to squeeze this, especially if you go after the underlings who still have jobs to protect.
Okay, so what we've seen sort of play out in front of us. Let me just play this one thing because it gains us entree to the discussion of your book and the excellent history of these spy agencies, which the FBI most definitely is. And what we gain here is an insight to the back room at the Secret Service. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of some people, you love her or you hate her. Here she is asking Kim Cheadle, the now former head of the Secret Service, a question about, hey, who was in charge during the day that President Trump almost got assassinated? Listen to this.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cheadle, I'd like to remind you that you're under oath. The site team has a senior supervisor, an advanced team, a protective intelligence team, a counter sniper element, and detail. Who was the agent in charge? How long has she been the agent in charge? And what is her Secret Service background?
So I'm not going to provide a name.
Why not? You're here to answer our
This
questions.
forum, I'm not going to provide names of.
You stated in your testimony, you said, I am here today to answer your questions.
That is correct.
Answer the question.
I'm not going to provide names of our personnel.
Okay, so Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of the nicer ones during that hearing. As usually, she's the firebrand out there. I mean, there was one congressional representative who told the Secret Service chief at that time, "Hey, this is just bullshit. What you're saying." I mean, it was just, that's what she said. Direct quote. Okay, laughs over. That tells us that there was a woman in charge. Now, women are highly capable. I consider myself to be a highly capable woman. But the thing is that there has been an effort at the Secret Service to impose DEI standards, to get 30% of the employees to be minorities or women. And when you're trying to save somebody's life or surround a really tall guy like the 6'3", 6'4" Donald Trump, and you got 5'5" women, that can be a problem. So that tells us, that gets us to your book, Big Intel, because you go back, you explain what has happened to these agencies of the federal government, and they're important. A whole book full of the history there. Can you start us out and tell us how we got here?
Well, that's the purpose of Big Intel. I set out to see how did our CIA and FBI and the rest of the intelligence community embrace critical theory and become woke. How did it start? And I thought I would just look at Barack Obama and how it started, and how Trump sort of let it continue to happen because his team didn't understand the problem. And then Biden reverted back to Obama to make things even worse. But in doing that, of course, everything has an origin. So you're looking at what are the origins of Obama's policies? And you look at those people and who shaped those people who made those policies. And then what ideologies did they embrace? And what things did they do in the past that would indicate their subsequent behavior? And you follow what Diana West calls a red thread, a continuum, a continuous line, a chain of personal custody of what is an ideology. It's critical theory, which was developed by who? Well, critical theory was developed by mainly refugees from Nazi Germany who relocated to Columbia University and elsewhere. And then they taught people like, or one of them was Herbert Marcuse, who was a U.S. intelligence officer who became one of these professors who trained who? Abby Hoffman, Angela Davis, other New Left people. He gave theory to their revolutionary cause to destroy our society. Well, who was he before he became a U.S. intelligence officer, and why was he one? Well, he was a communist agent with the German Communist Party back in Weimar, Germany. So then you go back to, well, where did all this start? And it goes back to 5 years after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. The Communist International, meaning the heads of the different communist parties around the world, and their Bolshevik leaders, including some really big names like Felix Dzerzhinsky, who was the founder of the Cheka, which became the KGB, were present at the meeting, and they decided that, or they all agreed that they could not replicate a Bolshevik violent revolution in Western societies because there was too much upward mobility in those Western societies. So they decided that the best way to destroy Western society is to destroy the society's belief in themselves. All their underpinnings, from the Greco-Roman democratic republican traditions to the Judeo-Christian moral traditions and other just the religious-based secular societies that we live in, to actual Western rule of law, to everything we hold dear in culture, to the nuclear family, destroying all of that and destroying the belief in it and degrading it all to make it look so unappealing that it had to be completely undone. Those individuals were the ones who set up in Frankfurt, Germany, what we call the Frankfurt School, or what they call the Frankfurt School. And a lot of them ended up at Columbia University and on the West Coast to develop critical theory, which was what Karl Marx called the relentless criticism of everything in existence. And this
Mission
is where
accomplished.
Yes, exactly. And J. Edgar Hoover was warning of this the whole time. I had a rather dim view of Hoover overall, but I liked that he had been anti-communist, but I didn't like, obviously his abuses of power. But when you track what he was doing. Now, he was FBI director for 48 years. But even before that, he was a Justice Department lawyer, and his first job was in what was called the Radical Division during World War I, to identify and round up communist subversives who had immigrated here from Europe and to send them home.
Mm. Well, of course, people took umbrage at that because, that whole Bill of Rights thing. And, but yet that currently, you talk about throwing out the Bill of Rights, throwing out due process, throwing out the ability to not testify against yourself. That's been turned on its head through the very same kinds of, by the same people, right? After, 50, 75 years later, same people now going after the citizens of the United States. Let's just put a pin in it here for just a moment before we go back in history and talk a little bit about how we have lost faith in our institutions, which I think is by design. And I think that they've brought this on themselves. And one of the things that we've seen happened right after the attempted assassination of President Trump. And it had to do with the discovery, if you will, of phone records of the person who's thought to be the lone shooter, and where this person has been, and the odd places this person's phone has been. And you chimed in that you had some knowledge of this, in the Oversight Project's assassination info drop. So while we still have it in mind, can you talk a little bit about that, what you've seen, what they've shared with you over at the Heritage Foundation?
Sure. Yeah, this was Mike Howell's team at the Heritage Foundation. It's called the Oversight Project. And they have been working to do real oversight over the FBI and the rest of the security apparatus. And then also trying to find things out there that the people who are supposed to be protecting us aren't finding. So what they're doing is they're doing a lot of questioning of people within networks, because in Washington, everybody knows everybody else, putting those things together. They're filing lawsuits. They're doing Freedom of Information Act requests. They're helping with hearings, with investigative hearings, both writing the questions that lawmakers ask and writing the answers to those questions so the lawmakers know the answer, and that's when they can say, you're lying. And doing a lot of work like that. And they've got a wonderful team. And so this is a new project that they have. I'm not speaking for them, but I do work with them. Where you're just getting commercially available electronic data the way, our phones track us and all the different apps on our phones and computers track us and so forth. And that's just commercially available data. So they went and they bought this data to track this shooter's electronic devices and anybody who was in touch with him. And this is how they were able to put out those maps this week about how the shooter or electronic devices associated with him made their way from Massachusetts down to Washington, D.C. right before the shooting.
Now, presumably, I mean, we don't know for sure if it was the shooter's phone, or do we?
It wasn't really clear. I don't know how personally identifiable the data is, but they were able to link these devices with people associated with the shooter, or meaning in his household or in his circle of friends or networks.
But we know that phone was at the shooter's home. We know that the phone was at a variety of different places, such as the place where the shooter worked. We know that the phone was at different places, an area, I don't know, maybe it was meetings. Some people have suggested it was certain meetings in a different state that was nearby. And then ultimately in Washington, D.C., where we find out that the shooter's phone is also near the FBI. Okay. So these look pretty damning, and these data points look damning. What do we know from this?
I don't know what to make of it all. It just shows a pattern. And so what they're doing is they're putting information out there. They're putting facts out that they find that they can't fully interpret. But if they share this, other people might have other information. And then we, in a sort of a wiki crowdsourcing approach, can kind of get to the bottom of where we might go. And now having a device found at the same block as an FBI office, it's really not unusual in Washington because there are FBI offices all around DC, and it's that particular block at the Gallery Place metro station. There are a lot of different places there. There are a lot of, there's some Chinese communist places there as well. But what I thought was very interesting that they didn't put out there, but knowing the area well, on that same block is the Charat House, which is now a Chinese restaurant. It's on 6th and H Street Northwest, and that was the house where the Lincoln assassination was plotted.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Yeah. Doesn't mean anything, but it's just a little factoid that, let's throw that in the mix. Does it mean anything or not?
I hope we can find out. Do you know anything further than there was one shooter, just a colossal failure on the part of the Secret Service for failing to secure that rooftop and all that stuff? Do you know any inside information on that you're willing to share?
It's pretty much out there. No, it's and there's a lot of stuff that's pure conjecture. Some of it's put out as fact. Some of it's well-meaning people, and some is just malicious people wanting to mess up public opinion. So I really don't know. But in addition to not having that roof covered, it's a simple thing which the Secret Service does is they'll park a tractor trailer truck in a line of sight view to block any potential sniper in an area that is either far beyond a perimeter or it's just simply the perimeter is too complex to secure. So it's a very simple thing. Rent a truck for a few hours and park it there. Didn't even bother with that.
Yeah. In fact, Dan Bongino was reporting, and he's got the best sources out there right now on this stuff. He and I can't remember her name, writes for USA Today and other publications, Real Clear Politics. But the deal is that it was so hot, nobody wanted to stand post on the roof. The locals didn't want to do it. Okay, fair enough. I wouldn't want to either. In fact, I wouldn't necessarily want to be in Iraq in the summer either. But yet our guys were wearing chem suits and all sorts of things in 125-degree weather, and they managed to do their job. However, the person in charge, presumably we understand a woman, who should know better, did not make sure that it was covered, notwithstanding the fact that the locals didn't want to cover it. Somebody from the Secret Service should have done it.
Then you either detail somebody to cover it, or you tell the president, we're sorry, there's a shooter spot over there, and we can't let you talk for the next few minutes till we clear it. It's not like he's always on time for his rallies either, so it's no big deal for him to wait.
Yeah, he was I think he was an hour late too, so.
And wait another 20 minutes to clear it or block it. They didn't even bother. And as he said, they didn't even tell him.
Right. And the other thing was that, as Bongino points out, the guy on the roof, obviously the bad guy on the roof, was taken out by a second set of Secret Service snipers. But the thing is that they had to hesitate because they didn't know he wasn't the guy who was supposed to be posted on the roof.
It all makes sense. I would leave that up to the guys who've either been snipers or been in the Secret Service, like Dan Bongino. But, there are so many other questions out there. But I think the most important question of all is, why do you have people who are physically unable to protect the president's person in the event of a shooting? So I'm not faulting someone for their sex. I'm faulting the fact that it's a person who, you've got a 6'4" president and a 5'5" bodyguard who, now to her credit, you saw she threw herself on top of him and protected him the best he could. But from here up, he was unprotected there, and that's not her fault. It's her supervisor's fault. And it's the person who was organizing the whole thing who former Secret Service Director Cheadle would not reveal to Congress. So there were conscious decisions made to put people unfit for that particular job. In addition to that other Secret Service agent who was photographed cowering behind President Trump and the rest of the group with their hands up like this.
Was that a recent one? I got the impression I actually circulated that too, but I thought it was a photo of Kim Cheadle when she was a Secret Service agent. Was that a real time? Was that a Trump photograph? I mean, because I just thought, what is going on here? Who is that?
Yeah, this came out the same day that the others did, and then
Wow.
her face and hairstyle and clothing matched the one who couldn't holster her weapon back at the van. So it appeared to be the same person.
All right, but there are more questions.
You don't have the best people possible on these details.
What was the question?
It's shocking. We saw all of us. We don't need any conjecture here. The Secret Service did not have the best people possible on that personal security detail. Now that was a policy decision.
Yeah, it was a policy decision. Someone made the decision to deploy more qualified people elsewhere. And as she testified in the congressional hearing, Kim Cheadle said that President Trump's usual cadre of people from the Secret Service protectors were there. And I'm like, really? This is it? I mean, it was kind of weird. I mean, you'd expect people who are taller, okay?
Yeah, exactly. And capable. If you have someone who is so out of shape that she cannot holster her weapon, what is she doing protecting the president? She should be on a desk duty at best, not personal security for the former president and the leading opposition candidate. This is insane.
It is insane, which brings to mind the observation someone made about the training schedules of the Secret Service agents. They're so thinly, deployed. I mean, they are just to a ragged edge, and they very rarely get to retraining. So I would like to know, when was the last time you went to the range, lady? And how is it that you cannot use your gun to its best and highest purpose, like, being able to put it back in the holster? And it was an external holster. It wasn't even like an in your pants holster. It wasn't anything on her chest, nothing. I mean, it was just like right there. I mean, I'm not the greatest gunslinger there is, but come on, that seems kind of lame, obviously.
Yeah. So, but it's all a matter of policy. This is what DEI is all about. And when you don't hire the best people for the job, this is what happens. And we have to ask, why is it this way? Which gets back to writing in Big Intel. The whole idea of DEI is to have a cultural revolution, to make change through putting people who have a different worldview, meaning no longer the best of the best, and a grudge against the system. Not saying that this relates to this particular Secret Service person, but the ideology that drives it, that Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas does, as the Secret Service ultimately reports to him, and as she did, because she embraced DEI. This is something where you are now taking, you're creating a social revolution within your own sphere for purposes that are completely at odds of what our country is all about.
Yeah,
so
Elon Musk calls it a mind virus. I mean, which makes sense to me.
Yeah, and he talked about what happened to his own son, which woke him up to this. He said his son is essentially dead because of what happened to him in the school that Elon sent him to. He was on with Jordan Peterson talking, you could tell he was choking up about it. And this is what caused him to wake up and think, what's going on here? I've got to fight this.
California's just passed a law. Gavin Newsom signed it into law, whereby parents will not be allowed to be told anything having to do with the transition of their child or pronouns or anything like that, which is essentially saying we're in charge of their health care now and you're not allowed to know. And of course, parents, that's one of the animating things that Elon Musk pointed to when he said, I'm moving out. I'm out of here. We're taking Twitter X, or moving it to Austin. Not that that's an improvement, but nevertheless, moving it out of California. And we're taking the SpaceX headquarters and planting the flag in Texas as well. We're out of here. And he says, I told Gavin Newsom that. I said, you're making a mistake here. He says, I said it to him a year ago. You are losing people with parents. And even Jason Calacanis, who's JCal on the All In pod, which is by the way, if you don't listen, you should. It's really interesting. He's super lib. I mean, he's just like the Mr. Woke Mind Virus guy. And he said, I'm out. We're gone. I mean, come on. That's just absurd. And here you have this set of beliefs that has permeated the intel community. And you say, and you've already mentioned, J. Edgar Hoover, no relation, saw this for what it was back in the day and tried to set up the FBI to counter this kind of mind virus in its ranks and in the mission of the FBI. And at the same time, you juxtapose the CIA or the OSS, the CIA precursor, Wild Bill Donovan, who didn't get it. Different missions, maybe, but didn't get it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Or talk a lot about it? About that.
We can talk a lot about it. In that, so Hoover started out he enlisted for the draft in World War I, but was told, we need you here to hunt down Bolsheviks and anarchists and radical socialists, because you had just had President McKinley not long before, who was assassinated by an anarchist, and then President Teddy Roosevelt had been shot by a would-be assassin while making a speech. And so you had anarchist bombings, all sorts of terrorism. They murdered the mayor of Chicago. They blew up the attorney general's house and so forth. So the FBI was, it was just, before there was an FBI, it was called the Bureau of Investigation. There was no F in front of it just yet. But so Hoover's job was to hunt down these ideological, foreign-born extremists who immigrated here to create these problems. It's just like the jihadis coming over today. Just because we admit them here doesn't mean that they should stay and that they should be American citizens. So his job was to hunt them down. And of course, there weren't that many laws back then about what the Justice Department could or could not do. And there was a broad consensus about what being a good American was, and what civic duty was, and what patriotism was, and loyalty to country was, and what's right and wrong. These are all the things that critical theory, poisoned and has destroyed in so much of our lives. And so he was warning, this is what these people are up to. And he learned about it because he read their own material. He had a lot of them monitored. He had a lot of them interrogated, and he had a whole army of agents to do this. And so he learned over time exactly what they were doing and had these groups penetrated, which is why the FBI, when President Franklin Roosevelt really empowered the FBI and elevated it, you had a broad consensus in the United States that this is what the FBI needed to do: go after fascists, anarchists, radical socialists, and Nazis, because they all wanted to overthrow our system by one means or another.
Yeah, well.
And Hoover was considered a New Deal Democrat at the time. He had this right-wing reputation. That's only because he was an anti-communist. But then, most liberals were anti-communist too. FDR was on a good day, but on a bad day, he was anti-communist. And that's a whole different story.
Yeah. And the mind virus gets in to an institution. You say not necessarily FBI, although that came later. But for example, in the CIA, it always started out with this idea that that we're the bad guys, I guess, and we have to understand the little guy. Tell me what you're thinking about that. And I'm going to grab this book here. You talk about how the FBI started out in small, understated way, if you will, and they didn't have a lot of guardrails. And now here are the guardrails. And we had Harvey come on. Of course, Harvey Silverglate has written the book 3 Felonies a Day, and there are so many laws that we could break. We break the law probably more than 3 times a day now. And ask anyone who was there at J6, which we're going to talk with you about, because that's the first time you were on my radar. And we had Harvey on recently. And a couple of times, because when we talked to him about his book, 3 Felonies a Day, we found out also that he was John Eastman's lawyer, one of John Eastman's lawyers in Georgia. So we had him back on. And John Eastman, how many times can you circumvent the law? You can't do it very often because there's always something else coming up. There's always something they can get you on. But anyway, now going back to the CIA now, we have, you talk a little bit about its underpinnings. And Wild Bill Donovan had a bunch of commies in the early OSS. So how did that sort of translate into how the CIA started doing its business?
As World War II was approaching, we found ourselves without a foreign intelligence service. Army had a tiny military intelligence capability. The Navy had an intelligence capability to protect our trade routes. But other than that, we had no intelligence service. So it was President Roosevelt agreed we should have one, but it was the British who came to us and said, we can help you set up a first-rate foreign intelligence service. It's got to do it quickly. So they helped. Roosevelt brought in General Bill Donovan, who was a great American. He was a great person. He was an attorney from New York. He'd set up the New York National Guard cavalry because our army at the time in before World War I was more of a constabulary force, not an expeditionary army. So we were down in Mexico where Pancho Villa had come and attacked Arizona. And so we had to go back and hunt him down. And so Bill Donovan was part of that. And he brought the New York cavalry down to Mexico. And that's when he learned the value of intelligence, as well as now as World War I began, we were a neutral force. And he was in Europe on a charitable, I think the Rockefellers, somebody contracted to find a way to help refugees behind enemy lines, so Donovan was doing that, and that's when he realized, hey, we need an intelligence service to collect intelligence. So that was his intelligence beginning as a private citizen, and then as a businessman later on, he was going around the world to collecting intelligence for private companies and for banking interests, and then later on. Roosevelt knew him because he was a Republican, ran for governor of New York to succeed Roosevelt when Roosevelt ran for president, Democrat. But he thought that Donovan was an honorable guy. And he said, would you set this up? Donovan said, sure. But he didn't have experience doing this, at the national level. So the British helped him. But what nobody knew at the time was the British intelligence officer at the embassy in Washington was an agent for Stalin. His name was Dickie Ellis. So our OSS to fight the Nazis in World War II was being set up by a Stalinist agent who was in the British Secret Service. So we were skewed to the Soviet line from the beginning. So when Donovan had this rush to hire people as analysts and as intelligence collectors and as operatives and so forth, he needed people in the research and analysis division who knew those countries in the Nazi-occupied sphere. So he hired these people, and aggressive, bright people, linguists, and you name it. They knew everything about those areas. And a lot of them were communists. They were members of the Communist Party of their country, either still under Stalin's operational control, or they had broken with Stalin because of his personal dictatorship, and he wasn't a real communist because he wasn't spreading it worldwide, or they liked Leon Trotsky, who Stalin had murdered in Mexico and so forth. So, but they were still communists. They had come here to overthrow America. But because they were so credentialed, Donovan hired them to provide the analysis to guide the president in his war-making decisions. Hoover was warning against this the whole time, but Hoover had worked under Donovan when Donovan was in the Justice Department and briefly in a Republican administration, and the two didn't like each other. So Donovan completely ignored the warnings about communist infiltration of the OSS. And so it became so penetrated by the communists that by the end of the war, Truman abolished it. He didn't think we even needed a foreign intelligence service anymore, but OSS had lost a lot of supporters because it was full of Soviet sympathizers in it.
Full of commies.
Yeah, and then they went into the State Department.
Yeah, they moved to the State Department. Yeah, that gives us hope, though.
So we have no intelligence service for a couple of years. They set up the CIA. They weed out as many communists as they can because it was the CIA started. Its role was to fight international communism. That was the role. It was part of Truman's containment doctrine.
Yeah.
But who does the CIA, in its official history right now at the CIA, it says one of its own from that time was Herbert Marcuse. Well, who was Herbert Marcuse? He was that Soviet asset from Germany who came to Columbia University and developed critical theory, critical race theory, critical law theory, critical gender theory, and trained people like Abby Hoffman and other new leftists and Angela Davis and everybody else. And the CIA proudly says he's one of their own.
It's frightening, but it is enlightening, obviously. And it's also something that gives us hope in this way. They dismantled the OSS and they recreated a new entity, the CIA. And that can be done. Yes, the federal government is a hell of a lot bigger than it was back when it was done, reorganized into the CIA. But at least we know it can be done. You actually suggest ways in which it could be done, and we'll get to that. But I sort of want to pause here for just a second to sort of get your backstory, because your story, your origin story with these kinds of issues is very interesting, obviously. And it's not always done through the CIA. Spying is not always done through the CIA. There are little side groups of which you were an apparent part. So could you tell us a little bit? I know you want people to pick up the book, Big Intel, and of course they should, and use it as a reference book and a good read. But also tell us, how you went to church and all sorts of stories that you were recruited.
It really helps when you've been duped. It really helps you to understand the world better. And in any personal relationship, when someone's lied to us and we fall for it, or we fall for the person and we realize we've been duped, hopefully we'll become wiser for it. And so in the case in the political and policy side with me, when I was in high school, I was a dupe. I got involved in the anti-nuclear energy movement for purely environmental reasons. This was in the late 70s, and you had all the hysteria and Soviet active behind it. And so I was a kid growing up in New England, and I would go, fishing with my dad and my grandpa off the coast. And this was right where they were building the Seabrook nuclear power station, and it was going to have a 6-foot pipe pumping water from the reactor cooling system into the ocean, right? And so I thought this is really going to kill the fish, and that's why I wanted to be against construction of that plant. And I got the basic training for it, and they pick, of course, high school kids to do the stupid stuff and to go up the salt marsh in a canoe with bolt cutters and spray. You go through and spray paint some stupid slogan on the reactor dome and then get arrested. They taught us all that. And of course, this was fun and it was really cool and exciting. But then they put some of us through what we later realized were um, these self-criticism meetings where you're supposed to have them criticize you, and then you criticize yourself to break yourself down. And they said, well, and these are professionals who've been brought in from California. And we're talking New England, 1970s, professional radicals from California training high school kids. And this was a struggle session that I was in. And three of them, were peppering me with questions. And one of them repeatedly was, why do you want to join this movement? And I said, well, because I care about the environment. Why do you want to join? I said, well, because I care about the fish. And they said, you're stupid kid. We're here to overthrow American capitalism. That freaked me out. And I, didn't know what to do except to leave the meeting and then never come back. And I thought, I'm going to hunt down these bastards. I'm going to expose them. I'm going to tell the country about them. And I ended up devoting a lot of my career to doing, to really expanding on that. So that's how it began in the 70s in high school. So by the time I got to college, I was interning with a U.S. senator and wanted to get into the intelligence field because now Ronald Reagan was elected my freshman year in college. So I cast an absentee ballot from George Washington University, and I had to show my ID at the town hall back home to apply in person for my absentee ballot. Even though everybody knew everything, because it was a small town, still had to show my ID. So voted for Reagan, and in the course of being a Senate intern, of course, you're going around looking for stuff. I got involved in College Republicans, and Young Americans for Freedom, and I'm meeting everybody. And in the course of all of this, I got involved in supporting President Reagan's policies to roll back communism. And especially because I had spoke Spanish, to fight the communists on our southern border in Central America. So that was my big activity. And then when I learned that the whole nuclear freeze movement now, so this had gone from being against American, but not Soviet, nuclear energy to now stopping American nuclear weapons, then I got interested in that. And when I realized this was a whole Soviet active measures campaign, and I was now working out of the College Republican National Committee that's run out of the RNC building, then I became sort of the White House liaison for Reagan's youth supporters. So that got me into this whole system. Anyway, the point ended up that I was able to make my way down to Central America as a student journalist. But in so doing, you mentioned I was told to go to church. And that had a big impact on me, not spiritually at the time, but because that's where I got my CIA cryptonym and was brought into the orbit of William J. Casey, who was Reagan's CIA director, and then ended up spending the next few years as a CIA operative, collecting intelligence to bring back to prove what the Soviet bloc was doing right on our southern border, and later to infiltrate and disrupt Soviet International Front organizations. But that part's not in the book.
Yeah. I mean, I had more questions about your background and how the heavens you didn't, I mean, you weren't a trained agent. You were, I mean, there's a guy that showed up and gave you some walking around money and said, go do it, gave you a name. You go down there and you give the name, and all of a sudden, the doors are open to you. And So, I mean, you were a young, dumb kid. I mean, I think.
I was 21 years old. See, I was going to go to Afghanistan with Soldier of Fortune magazine, because at that time the Afghans had been the Afghans had been invaded.
What are you doing with Soldier of Fortune? Yeah, keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's funny who you meet in Washington. So we had a Soldier of Fortune reporter speak to our YAF chapter at George Washington University, and then I got invited to a Soldier of Fortune party, which was, something quite different from any other party you'd ever go to. So in the course of that, he said he'd come back from Afghanistan where the Afghans were fighting the Soviets, and said, yeah, you want to come? Come on, let's go. So I was going to go. And then I talked to a friend of mine at the White House who was working with conservative activists. And she said, you don't want to do that. You speak Spanish. She said, you can do better. And I was thinking, better than Soldier of Fortune? But apparently, yeah, apparently. So that's what got me into this whole world of finally meeting a guy who was the national intelligence officer for Latin America, Constantine Menges. And then he said, I want you to meet my friend Jim. And I never knew Jim's last name, never knew if Jim was his real name, but Jim was an OSS veteran from World War II. And he took an interest in me. And here I am thinking, oh, I'm doing all these cool things as a college kid. This is just some old guy who wants to relive the good old days. No, I had no idea I was being assessed and recruited for a CIA operation under Director Casey's personal control. And this guy gave me walking around money to spend in Central America and to do the things that I needed to do and pay for my flights and so forth. But I didn't know until many years later that he was recruiting a team of rank amateurs, just the way Wild Bill Donovan did to set up the OSS. Bill Casey was doing the same thing, but to keep it from being public, he was paying for it out of his pocket, not out of congressionally appropriated funds, which gets to the whole church thing. So, and this was again a genius idea from Bill Casey. And he'd been recruited into the OSS because he was a New York financial lawyer who invented certain tax shelters to get around FDR's New Deal wealth confiscation schemes.
I laughed out loud when I saw that, or when I read that. I just thought that was wonderful.
So
even then,
so Donovan thought, Donovan, who was a lawyer from New York City working for banks, man, I'm just kicking this camera. Thought that was great, and thought that was great. I got to hire this guy Casey, who by then was drafted into the Navy for the war, and so. But I didn't know this. Bill Casey, when he was a Navy, younger junior officer, they put him in civilian clothes because he had such brilliant ideas that he couldn't speak to generals and admirals in uniform because they'd ignore him. So they put him in civilian clothes, but he's the guy who, during the D-Day planning, was there, and he said, let's parachute anti-Nazi Germans behind German lines and have them run sabotage operations from the route from Normandy up to Berlin to make way for the invasion force. And the whole British were saying, this guy's crazy. And the Americans were saying, this guy's crazy, but the idea is pretty cool. And he ran a couple dozen very successful missions that were crucial to bringing those D-Day forces all the way up to Berlin. And this is the kind of guy Bill Casey was. So he was searching for these amateurs to do for Ronald Reagan against the communists what he had done for America against the Nazis.
Did the CIA know you were working for him?
No, well, I don't think so. Then this was the whole idea. This was money out of his pocket. I didn't realize that till 30 years later when his son-in-law explained, when I told him the story, his son-in-law said, well, that's the way Bill Casey operated. Yeah, he did that so that he wouldn't have to report it to Congress because it's his own money, it's his own business. But then I was told by this guy, Jim, right before I was going on my first trip to Central America, he said, go to St. Matthew's Cathedral. That's in downtown Washington, D.C. Go to the 5 o'clock Saturday Vigil Mass. Sit in the back left pew and just wait till somebody talks to you. And I'm a Catholic, but a very bad Catholic at the time. And thought, well, this is, I guess this is, just trying to straighten me out before I go on this really dumb trip down to Central America. But I didn't know what the reason was. But okay, he told me he's a good guy. I'm going to go. I had no idea what was going to happen. And then
moral rectitude awaits in the back pew.
Go to church before you go to a war zone. Yeah. So I saw about 10 or 15 pews ahead. It was sparsely attended. And I saw a guy who looked like Bill Casey. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So what a coincidence. So I'm standing at the end, and the priest said the mass is over, go in peace. And then the processional hymn is playing on the organ, and people are going by, and I'm standing there, and a woman comes up, says, you're Waller. I said, yeah, well, what's going on? She said, stand here. And then she motioned to somebody else who was with Casey, and Casey shuffled up. And I'm this, you're a college kid. You think, well, the CIA director's there. He's walking right past you. Shake hands with him and say hi. He came right over to me. I felt like an idiot. I didn't know what to do. And he mumbled something at me. And I said, what? And he mumbled it again. And that was my extent of my conversation with Bill Casey. And then the man with him repeated the name and said, remember that name. And then he left, and then everybody left. And I just waited until everybody was gone. And that was the name Captain Luque. And I thought, well, I guess that must be my point of contact in Honduras. And I didn't realize for many years that I was Captain Luque, and that was my kryptonite. So when I invoked that name down there, that opened a new world for me because I was looking for somebody else named Covington.
Uh-huh. So, wow.
So I would say will get you a long ways if you meet the right people.
Sure. I want to know more about that. I mean, I do. I mean, do you have any daring do when you were doing that? Did you get into any super deal scrapes?
Yeah. I haven't written about those yet.
But you will, I hope.
I think so. My roommate was killed down there.
Oh,
so
I'm so sorry.
So he was, and they had to bury him in the mountains. He was a Canadian journalist named Pete Berkey, and he was shooting for Peter Jennings at was that ABC, NBC, wherever Peter Jennings was, and
ABC.
I think ABC, and actually Peter Jennings did a really nice segment on him, but it took the cameraman 3 weeks. Who didn't speak Spanish? It took him 3 weeks to get out of the country because the Sandinistas were hunting him down to get his footage.
Wow. And then he was killed by the Sandinistas, or is that what happened?
Pete was, but the cameraman was not. I think he's still around.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. Wow. I'll read that book. I'd like to talk with you about that. I could talk to you about that now, I guess.
Get most of the materials. It's a pretty, I had never even intended to tell any of my own background for Big Intel, but the publisher said you have to establish it because you have to establish that you were in or around the system enough and not simply write a book criticizing.
Right. And it's true. I mean, I'd like to have had a little bit more just because I'm just that greedy as I'm just an information whore, I guess. But is there my niece wanted me to ask you, is there such a thing as being a former CIA agent?
You can retire, and you do retire, and some people walk away completely, and they can, but it's also like let's say a fraternity where you're with teams, you identify with the agency in your career, and you don't want to be away. You want to keep that community. You want to have reunions. You want to end up doing contracting work. You want to have other, social or business or just good old times opportunity. So yes, you can be former CIA and have nothing to do with it ever again. So that's really a myth that there's no such thing as former CIA, although a lot of that myth is true. It's not a blanket fact.
Sure. Okay. Well, the reason I wondered too is because, I read all these spy thrillers because that's my genre. I love talking with spy thriller authors, and I would do audiobooks and that sort of thing for a spy thriller author. And what is always fun is that Brad Thor and Vince Flynn, now, of course, Don Bentley is going to be doing his books, but there's always some guy in the background. He's always setting up stuff, making sure there's a suitcase with all the stuff you need, some hotel room in some far-flung place, and so it is in Spooksville. And so we're just kind of wondering about that. So, okay.
Well, see, it's fun to do. So you don't want to stop, even if you've retired. It's still fun, and it's still, you get to make things happen. And even if you don't do it in an operational sense, you have networks of people and friends from your time in the agency. And then once you leave, you go into private business, either as contracting for the intelligence services or using your skills and your knowledge for private sector purposes. So you want to keep your contacts up. And if somebody says, hey, can you come and give us a hand on this? Or you've met so-and-so, can you get an entree in for us, for our person to get in, or get in yourself and tell us things. That's normal. Or become a novelist. Everybody from Ian Fleming to some of the newer spy thriller novelists today, they have background in this anyway. So that's your trade. So you want to keep it.
I kind of I love reading those books, and I love reading them because I always learn so much. I learn about ammunition, I learn about weapons, I learn about all kinds of creative gadgets, etc., that may or may not be real, but sound really interesting. For example, it'd be helpful, for example, if the Secret Service had put up a drone over the assassination site, attempted assassination site. But, what I wanted to do, one other, and this brings us to the assassination.
It's a drone. Just think of it. The president of El Salvador has drones for his personal security detail. Okay, so a little third world country, developing country, a nothing kind of country in the big scale. Yet the president of the United States, former president, possible future, doesn't have those basic things in his personal security. This shows how terrible the Secret Service has become in terms of ineptitude, let alone malice or compromise.
Yeah. And I think they have dark hearts. I think they're predisposed to having dark hearts. And I think that because of this wokeism, where you see people as oppressed and oppressors, and you automatically divide individuals and groups into subdivisions, and who has the higher authority or the higher moral authority, that is dangerous territory in a country that appreciates equality under the law. And as a result of this juxtaposition of these worldviews, they've thrown in with the wrong one, the critical theory. And as a result, people who just want to live their lives and be left alone are being prosecuted and that sort of thing. And we'll get into the J6 thing in just a moment. But I first want to play this for you, and I want you to explain what it means.
But he's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
What do you think the intelligence community would do if they were motivated?
I don't know, but from what I am told, they are very upset with how he has treated them and talked about them.
Okay, they're referring to Donald Trump. Tell me about this.
Let's break this down. First, you have the most powerful man in the United States Senate, who is an ex officio member of every single committee in the Senate. He can go in on any committee hearing he wants to. He has access to any information he wants to. He can move money and move authority around and demand answers any way he wants to. And he is saying that nobody, not even him, has the power to question the intelligence services.
Who's running the country?
This is the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's admitting this. He's really saying, Blackett, he's saying Trump is stupid to do this personally, not because Trump is going to get targeted, because no president and no senator can go after the intelligence community because they will get you. So the Senate Majority Leader is literally admitting that the intelligence community operates outside the confines of the United States Constitution.
That an oversight is fallow. It's non-existent. Or is it?
It's a joke. Come on. You had Dianne Feinstein, who she was on the Intelligence Committee for how long? When she had a Chinese Communist agent as her driver. You have the Senate Intelligence Committee staff, and a lot of the House Intelligence Committee staff are from the CIA. This can be helpful if the CIA, former CIA, is acting to show where the bodies are buried and how you can do proper oversight. But a lot of the time, those are CIA personnel in Congress working for the CIA, and not the other way around. Some of them are still on the CIA salary. So who are they going to answer to?
Yeah. That's frightening. Let's talk a little bit about January 6th. You were put on my radar because of this piece you wrote. You made notes the day of the riot. And I think what we'll do to gain entree to that topic is to ask you who these guys are.
Well, I don't know. I've seen that picture before, and let's just say this. Many times at these oversight hearings in the House and the Senate, senior FBI people, from the head of the National Security Branch all the way up to the director himself, were repeatedly asked, did the FBI have any personnel or assets on the ground planning or committing criminal acts of violence at the U.S. Capitol on J6? And FBI would not answer yes or no. They could have solved the matter the first time, but they didn't, which leads to the answer, who's in that picture?
And this is go ahead, keep going.
No, I mean, really. So I, like I said in that article, we published it at the Center for Security Policy, and then the Federalist ran with it. This was just personal observations because I was there on the Senate side, on the west front of the Capitol, on the Senate side, and witnessed this. But I live on Capitol Hill, so it was just no big deal to walk down and see it. I've been to literally hundreds of protests of all kinds during, living in and around Washington, D.C., but really wanted to go and see, people I sympathize with, meaning people who supported the president and thought that there was fraud in our elections, and just sort of see them one last time. The last thing anybody was expecting was trouble at the Capitol. But there were organized groups. These were cells of groups, so little units of 3 to half a dozen, almost all men. Some of them wearing camouflage and helmets. Some of them wearing COVID masks, which no respectable MAGA person would do at that time. Because we were all laughing at that. And then whom were wearing pieces of colored tape, orange, red, blue, green, yellow, as if they were parts of different units. And they were not acting like everybody else. It was a happy group of people. They were going from the White House while Trump was still speaking. They were marching down Constitution Ave to the Capitol. And it was very social. It was very nice. You could see people were real tourists because they were looking all around at the monuments and the things that you don't notice much of when you've lived there a long time. But then there were these groups that were running ahead, and they were not being social, and they were not, they didn't fit in. And so when trouble started breaking out, so I was about 60 feet away from the front by the inaugural platform when it was either the Capitol Police or the DC Metro Police started firing tear gas and flashbangs over the heads of anybody in the front who was causing the trouble. We didn't realize there was trouble at that time. Way back into the crowd and hitting people, striking one girl in the face. And that's when the crowd started getting angry. But then you could see people giving commands within the crowd. One guy had climbed up a lamppost. He was giving commands and giving signals. Some of them had earpieces. When we went to leave the area, because I thought there's going to be trouble here, there's going to be a stampede, let's get out. And we went to get out. We went over a little stone barrier, and like a 2-foot barrier. And a guy standing up on top ordered me to get back in, do not leave, no one's leaving. Who the hell are you? But there was another guy on the opposite side giving similar orders to these people. And meanwhile, people were still crowding in marching from the White House into a very small confined area. And something terrible is going to happen here. Meaning this was organized well in advance, and you could see it well in advance. While the narrative became Trump organized this spontaneous insurrection. And you go back to the reporting from January 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, it was all a spontaneous insurrection. So these were intended, that article was intended just to be my own private notes. So I would remember what I really observed that day myself and not have it contaminated by everything I would later talk to people about or read about or see. I wanted it to be my own snapshots of what I saw. So that was the source of that article. And it stands up to this day. Someone organized the violence. The FBI still has not busted anyone who has been accused of being the chief organizer of that violence. And of course, they still haven't found any bombers.
I think that they are hoping that the country believes that the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys did everything. And they've gotten them on different kinds of charges that will keep them behind bars for decades. And I know I've been watching the Proud Boys since 2016. Okay, so and this is in general, but they're coming up. They rose to combat Antifa, or just to goad Antifa into trying something. They're like, hey, we're going to have a free speech rally over here, and then just wait for Antifa to come and try to call down and attack a free speech rally, and they do it every single time. And so if the Antifa don't start nothing, won't be nothing is basically that. So I know that part of Proud Boys, and yeah, there's some of them are probably knuckleheads, but whatever. But I mean, they were the masterminds.
Yeah, right. And it's the knucklehead factor that was heavy in at January 6th, because I saw Proud Boys there, and they're black and yellow, and they were just, they were just there, and they were looking for troublemakers, of course, but they weren't instigating the trouble. Now, some of them ran up when trouble began. Of course, they're going to go where the trouble is, but they weren't the instigators of it. It was somebody else.
Yeah, who do you think that was?
I don't know, but they have never been found despite this global manhunt for them. And the FBI and DHS will to this day will not be frank about the presence of their own personnel there. So I have to say that this was some kind of a federal provocation, whether they organized it the way the Governor Whitmer phony kidnapping was organized and it got out of control. We don't know, or whether it was something larger. We just don't know. But I think the Whitmer kidnapping case shows that there's fact-based precedent for the FBI to be running extremist, violent types to commit acts of violence that they ordinarily would not commit in a Capitol building. In this case, it was the Michigan State Capitol. So, and then the special agent, or the special agent in charge of the Detroit field office, who was running that operation, then gets transferred to the Washington, D.C. field office.
Yeah, they loved his work so much with the Fed-napping conspiracy, of which most of the conspirators were feds or their assets, that they decided to redeploy him to Washington, D.C. well in advance of J6 to, I think, stage this charade. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anyone be violent at a Trump rally, for example, unless they were the people who initially started coming to berate Trump and start fights and stuff. Remember when there was a whole thing where they'd start in line and they'd pick fights with people in line, and people would started getting hip to it, and they started outing those people and with putting them on social media, going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to make you famous, you liar." And so those are the only people you'd ever see. And then finally, you never saw that again whatsoever. And then, let's say, for example, their favorite candidate for president was nearly assassinated. And I don't know about you, Michael Waller, but I've seen riot after riot after riot as a result of this, which is to say, of course, there wasn't. So my guess is that after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of riots by Antifa and their fellow travelers, or what, and their other anarchist buddies or what have you, Black Lives Matter and all this other stuff. The J6 riot was the first one they never went to in all of those years, apparently. Of course not. We know that there were Antifa people there. What else did so, I mean, what happened there? That was an operation, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's the FBI could have said from day one, we had nothing to do with it. We had assets there to collect, but we didn't. But look at what former Capitol Police Chief Steve Sund has said. Steve Sund was Capitol Police Chief at the time. He tendered his resignation the next day without being told to, just because he failed at his job to protect the Capitol. But one of the things he never received the intelligence reports that his chief of intelligence for the Capitol Police, her name is Yogananda Pittman, had been receiving. Now, the Capitol Police doesn't have its own intelligence service. It's only about 2,300 people, the whole Capitol Police, and its only job is to protect Congress, and it answers to the leadership of Congress, not to the executive branch of government. So all the information they get to secure the Capitol and the congressional leadership it comes from the FBI, it comes from the Secret Service, it comes from the Department of Homeland Security, and it comes from the D.C. Metropolitan Police. Those reports had indicated that there would be some type of Antifa presence, as well as right-wing violent presence there. But
those notorious right-wingers that just committed acts of violence heretofore.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you might get a few. Anyway, this is what the intelligence is picking up. He never got intelligence to say, we need to reinforce this Capitol. So the day before, they had like orange plastic hurricane fence up. But there were no canine units. There was no loudspeaker crowd dispersal system, which is a built-in permanent system. They had no extra forces out there. They weren't expecting anything. Yogananda Pittman, the intelligence person who coordinates with the federal government, she had all that information. She has never been dragged before Congress to testify.
Why?
She got, because she was made acting chief afterward. Talk about a DEI hire.
Wow.
And she had, I think the Capitol Police Union had a 92% vote of no confidence in her as their acting chief after Steve Sund.
Wow. She's
so
still
what
there.
happened to her? No, she became chief of police of University of California, Berkeley.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, one of the what's her name? The former Clinton associate or Clinton person, or was it?
Well, yeah.
Janet
now, who was the
Napolitano?
chancellor of the University of California system was former Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, who's a friend of who? Nancy Pelosi, whose district runs right up against Berkeley. And they said, get her out of town. She can't be questioned. She can't be hauled back.
Exactly.
Make sure she never testifies in detail. Make sure she's never deposed under oath, and give her a nice
big wet kiss. Golden tray.
No, it's like almost $500,000 a year compensation for this person.
Big
Get her
golden,
out of town,
what do you call it, parachute?
So then a new acting chief, the one who's there now, what's his name?
I don't know.
Whatever his name is.
JSG, some guy.
he kept her on secretly on the force because she had not yet put in enough years to collect her retirement. So while she's collecting a full salary from UC Berkeley, she's still collecting her salary from the Capitol Police. But Congress was never told about this until after the fact.
It's wow. So many people. Donald Trump did order the folks to order up National Guardsmen should the Mr. Sund, the Metropolitan Police, and Janet and the mayor of Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., and Nancy Pelosi, if they wanted them, and there were 300 or so there, but they were offered 10,000 or more, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps as many as 20, and they chose not to do it because, good Lord, what would that look like in the nation's capital? And later, of course, this video of Nancy Pelosi came out. Here she is admitting that she totally effed up.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
That is not a question of how they had. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
Well, she won't say that out loud, though, will she?
No, not at all. This was all a big Trump conspiracy to overthrow the government. She says that in her private vehicle with, I believe that was with her daughter, who was filming a documentary on that day, just by happenstance.
Yeah, so what an unusual thing. One other thing, we found out that, of course, Revolver News found out that, hey, look, isn't this interesting that the Vice President, Kamala Harris, was not in the Capitol at the time that the Senator and would-be Vice President Kamala Harris was not in the Capitol at the time, as the feds did, using that as a cudgel against which to jack up the J6 people who've been brought up on charges and inflate the charges against them. And then we later found out that Kamala Harris was not, in fact, there. She was at the DNC hanging out and doing who knows what. So at the time that Kamala Harris was there, when she's got her Secret Service detail there, that's when the folks find the pipe bomb, the inert pipe bomb. So can you circle that square for me? How is it that she's there? They've done a bunch of sweeps and stuff like that with the dogs, etc. Don't find the bomb, and then all of a sudden, at the time that the riot is supposed to start, they find these things.
Well, there are a couple issues here. First, you said the pipe bombs were inert. So this means that whoever orchestrated this violence and these other actions on Capitol Hill that day did not intend for anybody to get hurt or killed. Therefore, it wasn't really an insurrection to overthrow the government or to stop Congress or anything like that. If it was unarmed protesters and inert bombs, first of all. Second thing, the Secret Service is, to our knowledge at least until this past week, has been so good at security that they would never let a bomb be around where a vice president or a vice president-elect would go, especially in the bushes right by the entrance of the Democratic National Committee, which is a prime target. The Democratic National Committee is surrounded by Capitol Police cameras, which the Capitol Police would not release to the public until forced to later on. So that's a very secure area. So the Secret Service, finds the bomb that, created such a problem. But look at the bomb. It's a fake bomb. It's not only inert, there's no explosive in it, but there's a kitchen timer attached to it. Now, the kitchen timer, the old-fashioned kitchen timers that are mechanical, and you turn it and it goes up to an hour and then it ticks until your time is up. That bomb had supposedly been placed there many hours earlier. So how could a bomber, even if he used that really old-fashioned device, how could a bomber have placed there many hours earlier with the purpose for it to go off when Kamala Harris was going to be there? It just makes no sense at all. So that was just planted there as a prop. So somebody did it for show. And they had to do it for show. And we don't know who, but the Secret Service would have found it in the sweep prior to Kamala Harris going. So even prior to her being in the vicinity, they would have found that in a sweep, and they did not. So that really suggests that either somebody from the Secret Service or somebody with a different agency with Secret Service clearance, meaning they wouldn't be suspect if they were seen poking around bushes, was responsible for planting that fake bomb.
When did the American people become the enemy of the people in the eyes of the CIA, the FBI, and all of the alphabet agencies?
That's really a tough one. The devolution of this whole process has been so long. You don't find a tipping point until the Obama administration. So you think, for all his faults, J. Edgar Hoover was there. He didn't do widespread surveillance of people. His spying on certain groups was very limited and very low. FBI was a very low-tech agency. They didn't even have a SWAT team. They had no tactical units at all. So for all of Hoover's shortcomings and the FBI's shortcomings, it was nothing compared to what technology has brought to the FBI, and then to what the post 9/11 changes to the FBI brought, where it had been a bottom-up agency with a strong director, meaning all of the cases were originated at one of the 56 field offices around the country. They were not initiated from headquarters. 9/11 changed that. So when President George W. Bush came in and said, we're never going to have a terrorist attack on American citizens again, and he pointed to Robert Mueller, who had just gotten over prostate cancer, was only FBI director for a week, and said, make sure this never happens. And Mueller, who was a Marine, went and did just that. And he took the FBI, he centralized it from the top, created 60 new management positions at the top, took away a lot of the powers of the individual 56 field offices on the ground, concentrated them at the center in Washington, and then cut the special agents in charge of each of those field offices, cut off their direct contact with the FBI director. So it became a top-down organization. Then Bush went and took the intelligence community, which by now this reorganization had become 18 different intelligence agencies, always designed to be separate so that they could never present a threat to our constitutional government, and put them all together under the leadership of an Office of the Director of National Intelligence called ODNI, which was supposedly to coordinate to make sure they all talked to each other. But he centralized it from the top and then created laws like the Patriot Act to make everything, by statute, and then to have things invade our whole day-to-day lives down to our bank transactions and phone conversations and everything else. So Bush had intended for that to combat jihadist terrorists. But soon enough, it was, you can't say jihadist because that's hurtful. That's bigoted. That's racist. So you have to say whatever. And then terrorists got changed to domestic violent extremists, which is anything you want, because terrorist was defined by statute with a fixed definition, whereas domestic violent extremists can be whatever the bureaucracy wants it to be. So that by the time a revolutionary like Obama came in to fundamentally transform America, he now had central control over everything and could put in his own like-minded people at the tops of all these entities to impose his social revolutionary mandated changes from above with the executive orders that he put in place. So that began the politicization of these agencies in a way that we've never seen. And not just Democrat versus Republican or liberal versus conservative, but those who support critical theory values and who view America as the oppressor that must atone for its years of terrible things, from slavery to overthrowing communist regimes. Brought all that together and then viewed the American public, because by this time they'd run out of jihadists to hunt down. Any bureaucracy is always going to be looking as a living organism, looking for more prey, looking for more enemies. And so that's when, with this revolutionary takeover of these services, they started viewing half the population as the enemy.
And indeed, they were dismissed by the now President of the United States, soon to be not President of the United States, Joe Biden, as semi-fascists. And then we had years of that incendiary language. And the next thing you know, there is an effort to assassinate Donald Trump. Connection?
Well, yeah, you've got a steady diet now that Donald Trump is colluding with the Russians. Donald Trump is a Putin tool. Donald Trump and all of his supporters are traitors. If you support Donald Trump, you support Putin. You're an enemy because he's an enemy, and Putin's a bad guy. Who, if you look back, the American liberals and progressives thought Putin was okay. It was only until he was not okay with them before they became not okay with Putin. But the point is, you have these people who now, for 8 years plus, the public has been subjected to a steady diet of treason, betrayal, threat to democracy, threat to, enemy of the Constitution, whatever they're calling it. So that 8 years to an older person is still not a lot of time, but we're still going to be inculcated with that one way or another. But imagine if you're a 20-year-old. If Donald Trump is Hitler, and worse than Hitler, and if his supporters are jackbooted Nazis who want to round us all up in camps, well, it's logical. You got to kill Hitler before he takes power. Think of how great the world would have been had that happened. And then you think, well, maybe it's my job to kill this new Hitler. And it's certainly our jobs as uneducated, woke, DEI-oriented cadres within the security apparatus to treat half the population as enemies, because that's the only way to protect democracy.
I had somebody ask me the other day, well, gee, I guess you're happy that Joe Biden's not going to run. And I said, it doesn't matter. It's the same policies anyway. And
he never ran the country anyway.
Beg pardon? Oh, he never ran the country. He didn't. And no president really does run the country, but they do put people in positions to make a difference. And so personnel as policy is rife. That matters. And so here we are. That's why it's important if Trump wins, and who knows if he does, he's got to make sure he makes better policy or personnel decisions in the next
personnel decisions and policy. But I mean,
He left a
didn't
lot of stuff
seem
on the
to-
table, you note.
He left a ton, and he didn't come in with a team. He had horrible personnel choices. He had swamp creatures doing presidential personnel. He put in bad people just because, I don't know, they had nice resumes, or they seemed official, or they dressed, sharply, or whatever else, or had fancy uniforms. But he didn't have real deep reasons for appointing most of the people he appointed. But now he understands, and now he's out to fix it.
Honest to God, all of that lawfare, raiding his home. People don't understand that has never been done in the history of the United States of America, where a subset of part of the executive branch has taken upon itself the ability to raid another person, or to raid the president, yet another part of the government. One of the triad of things that we had called government is absolutely unconscionable. Pierced attorney-client privilege for criminal reasons when there was no crime. All kinds of norms, not just shattered, imploded, indeed exploded. I wonder, there were the shooter, and I know we have to get to other things, but just one footnote on the shooter who tried to take him out. He had a detonator on him, supposedly, and he had a car full of explosives, supposedly. This is one of the initial reports, which are, as we know, are usually wrong. He could have done a hell of a lot more damage. As it was, he murdered a man, and there was a colossal screw up on the part of the Secret Service. And so, that was a guy with weapons, with bombs. Where were the bomb sniffing dogs? Where was the Overwatch?
Right.
There was so much wrong with it.
Through the metal detectors with a rangefinder, maybe you should be taken aside for questioning.
I was just going to golf a little bit to see how long my drive was. What the hell are you doing? You can't even take in a backpack, for crying out loud. What the hell you do bringing in a rangefinder? I'm sure there are, maybe you're a photographer. I don't know. Where's the camera? So many red flags, and these dupes, these dopes, these dummies who were running the magnetometers let this guy in. And then he went outside the perimeter. So already had his gun positioned, all that stuff, ran his own drone. There's so much wrong with the story. It stinks to high heaven. What was that book a few years ago where he found out that Joe Biden liked to swim in the nude in front of female Secret Service agents and all that stuff? Just god awful. Never wanted to have the nuclear football with him when he was on duty, kind of a deal. And, there would always have to be in a Secret Service car like 15 minutes behind, because every weekend he went to Delaware, every weekend. And just all kinds of things. It was just a man who did not treat seriously his job. I think he just felt it was just his time to just cash in, which he obviously did, as anyone can tell you. So as a result of all of these changes in the CIA, FBI, DHS, all of these things, we're in pre-crime territory right now. We are all suspects until proven otherwise. Just comment on that before we get to some of the changes you would like to see made in these organizations. And I am going to ask about COVID.
Yeah, this is part, and this has nothing to do with wokeness or critical theory, but when you set up an internal security apparatus, as had been done post 9/11, and their job is to prevent terrorism from taking place, and you cannot isolate the prime suspects of terrorism because your political correctness won't allow you to. And then you make the entire country, not just a segment of the population, but the entire country as potential enemies, where you're having your bank transactions reported, not for tax reasons, but because you might be a terrorist funder. And that threshold is $5,000 bank transaction automatically gets reported to the authority as potential terrorist financing. But a lot of banks like Capital One don't tell their customers, but they reported over $3,000 just to cover their own behinds. So you have this, you're treated like a terrorist. You have to have your name registered on everything. Now they're rolling out these real IDs where they've got our biometrics attached to our state driver's licenses that are part of a federal database because we might be a terrorist. And these are mandatory if you want to fly and if you want to have, to go into certain places where ordinarily an American citizen could do. While you at the same time, you're getting, millions and millions of illegals coming here with no backgrounds at all that we know of. So they're only subjecting American citizens and Americans who are here legally to these draconian measures, but they're letting all these foreigners from around the world come in and not subjecting them to any scrutiny worth its while. So we're in really dangerous territory. And of course, if you protest or you label these foreign enemies, you're the enemy. And you've got people who are January 6th just because the marriage between the intelligence community and big tech has made it easy to track all of our phones, all of our mobile devices, who we're talking to, who we're associated with, everybody in our address books and everybody in their address books and so forth. So there's no presumption of privacy anymore with facial recognition where they can capture our faces and identify us immediately and track us wherever we go. And now they have what's called gait recognition, where it recognizes our gait, how we walk, how we swing our arms, what our posture is, and then they attach that to us. So there's no escaping any government scrutiny anymore. So this marriage with these centralized, out of control agencies and big tech is really making, fast forwarding George Orwell to us now, and we have no recourse against it.
You said in your book, Big Brother has become part of the family.
Yeah. That was actually Tom Baker, a longtime FBI man, who wrote that in his book, The Fall of the FBI.
Yeah,
Tom and I have become friends. Yeah. Tom and I become friends after both our books came out. And he's an old timer. He started when J. Edgar Hoover was running the Bureau. And so, yeah. And he's got his own ideas for what to do to transform the Bureau, but he says the same. He thinks we should try to fix the Bureau. I say we should take it apart, break it into pieces in an orderly way, and keep the essential functions so that we still have them as a country. But nevertheless, we see the same problem of this cultural rot that has just wrecked the FBI from top to bottom and created a really abusive, Central European style domestic intelligence service with police powers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't realize that the FBI was actually an information, what am I looking for? An IC organization, an intelligence organization. I thought they were law enforcement until recently, obviously, but they've been that way ever since they started, right?
Well, a lot of their champions like to say they weren't. They were always a good law and order agency because that's the image that J. Edgar Hoover created. But really, it began hunting down radicals and terrorists. So it had a legitimate domestic intelligence function, but then it became a law and order agency. After 9/11, though, it was formally brought into the intelligence community. So while it answers to the Deputy Attorney General and the President on the one hand, it also answers to the Director of National Intelligence and his huge office, which is supposed to be very small, a coordinating entity on the other hand. So it has become an internal security domestic intelligence service that our Constitution was never intended to see.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but the DNI, as well as the CIA chief and Susan Rice, President Obama, Joe Biden, and probably Valerie Jarrett, one of the fellow travelers that has helped inculcate Barack Obama with his communist tendencies, that it's a communist plot. They were all at the meeting after Trump had been elected. It was. And they said that maybe it was, I think I might be conflating two different meetings, but anyway, let it just be known that these people were in a meeting. Then they were all told that Hillary was running an op to call the Republican nominee a Russian spy, and they all signed off on it. They all thought that was cool. And then when they met after Trump won, Susan Rice left herself a note or, email saying, we did everything by the book. They knew what was coming. They knew what was going on. They let it happen. Why?
This is another total breakdown of the system, because before you would have an FBI saying, we can't do that, that's illegal. Or we can't predicate a case on the evidence we've been presented because it came from a political campaign aimed at a political opponent. Just won't do it. Yeah, not even J. Edgar Hoover would ever do such a thing like that. It was Hoover really answered to each president, and he did whatever that president wanted up until the very end, Democrat or Republican. That's how he lasted so long. But when you have the FBI is given a case that originated from Hillary Clinton's political campaign to call Trump a Russian asset, and then gets packages of information, a dossier built by who? By Christopher Steele. Who was Christopher Steele? He was former British intelligence. Okay, so you got a former foreign intelligence officer who cooks up this dossier based on sources of whatever value or dubiousness, and information from a Russian national who the FBI believed at the time was a Russian spy for Vladimir Putin. And they put that together to build a case to investigate Trump in the biggest counterintelligence investigation we know of in the past decade, Operation Crossfire Hurricane. So meaning an operation is different from an investigation. An investigation merely investigates. An operation is an op. That's different. So that was Crossfire Hurricane, to not only wreck Trump as a candidate, or to try to. FBI is directly intervening now in a political campaign, but to wreck his presidency. That everything he's doing is in Putin's interests. And of course, all that was blown up.
Yeah, it was amplified by the media.
It was amplified by the media. You only had James Comey was fired as FBI director. Okay, great. What about his whole counterintelligence column of the FBI, which isn't really very good, and it's not very good, and it's never been very good, regardless of what the spy novels will tell you, because almost all the big FBI counterintelligence cases have been walk-ins, defectors, foreign intelligence services giving information to the FBI and say, hey, you've got a spy in here. Very little of it has been, almost none of it in the whole FBI history, has been actively infiltrating the adversary's intelligence services to bust them up, so it's all been like fly swatting and free stuff thrown at us. So FBI counterintelligence is a joke, but who was running this at the time? Peter Strzok was running this at the time. And then Andrew McCabe, who was the number 2 in the Bureau, had come out of that counterintelligence column. So this is the state of our counterintelligence. You haven't had a single whistleblower from FBI counterintelligence come out. And the other whistleblowers who have come out, Carl Serafin and Steve Friend and these other guys, they've all been terribly retaliated against as a warning from the FBI. Don't ever do this or we will wreck you, because the worst crime you can commit as an FBI agent is to embarrass the Bureau.
Yeah. Yeah. You said in your book, the Secret Service, the CIA effectively died from COVID. Before we get into your fixes for the FBI, tell me what you mean by that. The CIA effectively died from COVID, which I felt was one of the funnier lines. Sad, but true.
Well, it really did effectively die from COVID, because COVID was the worst disaster to hit our country. It was arguably worse than any war we fought since the Civil War, because look at how it wrecked business, families, children's education, the formative years of young kids, 2 years living behind a mask, not being able to be with friends, not being in a classroom, living in this climate of fear, shunning your neighbor, because you might catch this virus, which was originated where, or we're not allowed to say where it originated. If you're going to have an intelligence service worth anything, it has to be able to determine, where did this plague come from? And you had the intelligence community run its assessments of where they believe the novel coronavirus 19 originated from. And it was only the CIA that couldn't figure it out. And then we learned that the director of the CIA was giving financial bonuses for analysts to change their analysis from saying it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab in China to saying, well, we really can't assess with any degree of assurance where it came from. Because why? Because we can't get the Chinese to cooperate with us. So we're running a multi-billion-dollar secret intelligence network like the world has never seen. And the CIA is saying in an analytical product for the president of the United States and the whole country to say, where did this virus come from? That they can't locate where the virus came from in China because the Chinese Communist Party's secret police would not cooperate with us.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Sam Faddis has been on this program.
The analysts to change their analysis.
Yeah.
So this shows how sick this is.
That I didn't remember that part about them paying bonuses. Maybe I didn't, maybe it wasn't in the news or something. I didn't hear about that. But Sam Faddis, former CIA Middle East bureau chief or whatever you call them, station chief, said on this podcast, he goes, we should have had a spy in the Wuhan lab, for God's sake. Why is it we don't do human anymore? What the hell is going on here? You got to touch Indians. You got to be there,
Oh, he's absolutely right. It's not like the Wuhan lab was some impenetrable target. We were funding the Wuhan lab.
Yeah, exactly. That's
the French government was funding the Wuhan lab.
We could have had people working there.
Our intelligence service. The French are great. They share with us. They didn't have anybody in there. We didn't have anybody in there because why? Because of the science. We can't mess up intelligence with science.
Wow.
So
that's bull.
So think about all that and think about how, remember, we lost our whole human networks of agents within China because of sloppiness or treason within the CIA. We lost those people. Now, we don't know if they were at the Wuhan lab, but the fact that you had CIA Director Brennan faking intelligence and bribing CIA analysts to change things to mislead the public. What other viruses are being developed at that Wuhan lab? And oh, by the way, who's in charge of the lab? A 3-star People's Liberation Army general who is head of their biological warfare program. So you have the Chinese military's biological warfare program includes the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And we say, this is not a weaponized virus.
In your book, I have to I want to just keep talking about that. It is so anger-inducing. In his book, Big Intel, J. Michael Waller discusses the FBI and what to do about the FBI. And you have the floor to discuss the ways in which we can dismantle the FBI and not lose a step in our intelligence gathering as well as law enforcement.
Yeah.
Go.
First of all, there's a lot here, but first of all, we need much of what the FBI does. We need a real counterintelligence service. We don't have, but we have people in there with the training, and so we have something to start with. We need counterterrorism. We need fighting child sex trafficking. We need a lot of other things. We need the FBI's really excellent crime lab and fingerprint lab and all of that. We need that stuff. But do we need an FBI? And I don't think we do, because the FBI has become so top heavy, so careerist oriented, and it's so unaccountable and so untruthful that it's lost the public confidence. It's not a question of just changing the directorship one more time. It's a question of taking its constituent elements, what do we need most, and moving it over to different agencies without creating whole new bureaucracies, or taking apart other agencies like DHS and taking certain essential functions of DHS, like sealing our border, like arresting illegal aliens, like protecting our president, You need those functions, but do you need the DHS? And you don't. But let's just stick with the FBI for itself.
Yeah,
you can
go
take these
after the
different
DHS
FBI
next time. Ay. What a loser outfit that is.
And other things too. So why does the FBI have a firearms and an explosives unit when we already have a DH or ATF, right? We don't need two. So get it out of the FBI, put it someplace else, and then do something with ATF later on. The same thing with certain FBI counterterrorism capabilities. There are other organizations that handle that. As for its big duty, which is criminal investigations, carve that out completely from the FBI and move it over to the U.S. Marshals Service. The Marshals were founded by George Washington. So it's the only law enforcement agency the federal government has that was founded by the founding fathers. The scandals that it's had over the years have been very few and very minor compared to what the FBI and DHS have been doing since then. So the Marshals have their own ethos. They're probably not going to like having these other FBI functions, but it has to be moved over there. And the Marshals aren't yet quite as woke as the FBI and DHS. So take that and take the crime lab, move that over to the Marshals. Take the FBI Academy at Quantico, which the Marshals already share, move that over to the Marshals. So you've got the whole criminal branch of the FBI carved out. You've got the counterterrorism and firearms section carved out. You've got the laboratory and technological sections carved out, which leaves a few pieces now to deal with. You don't need a lot of those elements. You don't need the human resources part, which is the real enforcer arm of this wokeness and critical theory that the FBI has embraced. Cut that all, abolish the other positions, and by abolishing those positions, you're abolishing the personnel that go with those positions, meaning they're out of the federal workforce. They lose their security clearances. They cannot come back in as contractors or anything else. So you get rid of that. And then the 300 lawyer general counsel's office. You don't need something that size. So just get rid of it all. And so now you have nothing.
Isn't that what
left
the DOJ's for?
Right. So now you have what? You just have a bare skeleton. And it's that skeleton with its woke central nervous system that's the problem. That's the main problem anyway. And so just get rid of it. So the FBI was founded, or what the FBI says is its founding document, was a 1908 memorandum from Attorney General Bonaparte, calling for setting up a Justice Department force with special agents. And that what the FBI calls its founding document. So the FBI wasn't founded by an act of Congress. So if it was founded by an Attorney General memorandum with the authority of the president, it can be abolished by an Attorney General memorandum under a single president, and then take the money that was appropriated for that and then program it elsewhere as the law allows, and then work with Congress to formalize these new entities as we do a serious reorganization. So that's what would happen and should happen with the FBI.
Well said. Well said. You'll find all of his information in the book, Big Intel, How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. You could have added, although it would have been too long a title, and How All of Us Became Suspects. Thank you so much for coming on the Adult in the Room podcast, and I hope you'll come back again.
Victoria, I really enjoyed this. I hope to be back too. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it too. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen. And give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1ACast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.